Today's lesson is on solving multi-step absolute value equations. So the equations, that means it's got the equal sign in it, not inequality. So keep that in mind. So the first kind of example, solve equations with two operations. The steps in order to solve these, first step is to get the absolute value by itself. You may have to add, subtract, multiply, or divide to get the absolute value by itself. Once you have the absolute value by itself, then you use that definition of absolute value to write it as two equations. One with a positive equal to, and one with a negative equal to. So for here, they have absolute value of x equals 75. So you have to make x equals 75, x equals negative 75. And then the only other difference when you solve these, when it comes to graphing it, you don't have arrows going in one direction or the other. All you need to do, there's only two answers for these problems. And so you put a dot. So in this case, you put a dot at negative 75 and a dot at positive 75. So these problems are a little bit different than when you're dealing with inequalities. So let's look at an example. It says solve and graph. Let's do this, the first one here. So I have the absolute value of x divided by 2 minus 1 equals 14. I need to get the absolute value by itself first. You always do adding and subtracting first. So I need to get this minus 1 away. So the opposite of subtracting 1 is adding 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Now the absolute value of x divided by 2 equals 15. Now the opposite of dividing by 2 is multiplying by 2. So when I multiply by 2 on both sides, I end up with the absolute value of x equals 30. That means I'm 30 steps to the right of 0, 30 steps to the left of 0. So I can say my answer, x can either be a positive 30 or a negative 30. And then to graph it, I just put 0 in the middle, 30 over here, negative 30 on this side, and then I'll put my dots on, a dot on negative 30 and a dot on positive 30. You can work on the next one yourself. The second type of example, you have more than two operations. You're going to do everything else the same, but you're just going to have to get the absolute value by itself by doing more than two steps. So let's show one of these. So again, I need to get absolute value by itself, and I always need to do adding or subtracting first. So I want to get rid of this positive 4, so I subtract 4 on both sides. Now I have the 5 times the absolute value of x divided by 2 equals 15. Now here, you have a choice of either dividing by 5 or multiplying by 2. You could actually solve this in one step. What's the reciprocal of 5 halves? The reciprocal of 5 halves is 2/5. So if I multiply that by 2/5, the 2/5 and the 5 halves, they cancel each other off. All I have left is the absolute value of x on that side. But now I multiply this side by 2/5. Remember, this is 15 over 1. And I can simplify. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. So now the absolute value has to be 6 steps away from 0 in both directions. So I would say x equals a positive 6 and a negative 6. And then to graph it, I have 0 in the middle, 6 on the outside, negative 6 on the inside. Put my points down because it can only be a negative 6 and a positive 6. You may work on the one on the right yourself. There's some more practice problems. The third type of problem. Solve equations with operations inside the absolute value. Again, we still do the same two steps. Get the absolute value by itself, then use the definition of absolute value to write it as two equations, one with a positive, one with a negative. Let's look at an example. Do this first one for you. So again, to get the absolute value by itself, we want to do the opposite of subtracting 10, which is adding 10. Now the absolute value of 5x equals 35. Now this is telling me that the absolute value, whatever that value is, it's 35 steps to the right and 35 steps to the left of 0. So I can write this as two equations. So 5x equals 35 and 5x equals a negative 35. Now we just do basic algebra. How do I get x by itself? I divide by 5 on both sides. Here, divide by 5 on both sides. So now I have x can equal 7. X can equal negative 7. Number line to graph it. 0 in the middle, 7 on the right, negative 7 on the left. Put our points down on 7 and negative 7, and there's your graph. I will let you do the next one yourself. There's some more examples you can work yourself, and one more. And let's go through an application. A 60-centimeter indoor archery target has several rings around a circular center. If the average diameter of a ring is d, and an arrow landing in that ring scores p points, the inner and outer diameters of the ring are given by the absolute value equation d plus 6p minus 63 equal 3. Find the inner and outer diameters of an 8-point ring. So right now we need to solve this absolute value. The first step is we need to put down the number that p represents. In the problem they said p is the number of points. And the question is telling us find the inner and outer diameter of the 8-point ring. So for p, in my absolute value equation, I don't know what the d is because I got to find the diameter. I put d plus 6 times 8, because they said the 8-point ring, minus 63. This has to equal 3. And so when we can simplify in the absolute value first. So you follow order of operations. So 6 times 8 is 48. And so now I have 48 minus 63. So d plus 48 minus 63. 48 minus 63 is going to give you a negative 15. So right now I have an absolute value of d minus 15. This has to equal 3. So what that is telling you is the distance, the absolute value is 3 steps away on both sides of 0. So if I write it as two separate equations now, I'll put 1, d minus 15 equals 3, and then d minus 15 equals a negative 3, because we want to find the diameter of the inner and outer. So to get d by itself, I add 15 to both sides. Do that for both. So now I have an answer of d equaling 18 and d equaling 12. So these would be my inner and outer ring diameters. This last one, I will have you do this one yourself. You would just set it the same way. The only difference is you do not need to put anything in for x because you will be solving for x. X is going to be the least and greatest number of items. your assignment for next time. You have lessons 94. There's only 5 problems this time, so 2, 12, 13, 14, 22. You do not need to worry about the quiz.